The phone buzzed against the marble countertop, vibrating with a message that would end my marriage. I looked down at the screen, expecting a confirmation code, but instead, I found a declaration of war. My husband took the restaurant reservation I made for Dad's celebration and brought his parents. He said, "My family deserves it more. Go to some cheap pub?" I replied, "My brother owns this place." But he didn't listen. He left me on read, arrogant and entirely unaware that he had just signed his own professional death warrant. Most women would have thrown the phone, but I felt a terrifying calm settle over me. It was the absolute stillness of a heavy steel door slamming shut, locking away the last 3 years of my life. My hands didn't shake as I set the device down next to the chopped onions. I stared at his contact photo, a smiling picture from our honeymoon, and realized I was looking at a stranger. He thought he had crushed me, but he had merely clarified things. Logan assumed I was scrambling right now, searching for a burger joint that would take a walk in. He pictured me crying in the kitchen, while he dined his CEO at my expense. Using the reservation code I had secured, it was a power move, a flex of dominance to remind me of my place. He believed that by changing the name on the booking, he had stolen the night. He had no idea that the booking wasn't just a table. It was a test. The theft of the table didn't bother me, nearly as much as the insult to my father. Calling Brian a man who belonged in a cheap pub was a mistake Logan could never undo. My father had spent 40 years scrubbing grease from his fingernails, so I could have clean hands, and Logan treated him like an embarrassment. That text message wasn't just a cancellation, it was an eviction notice. He wanted to erase my history to polish his future, but he forgot who built the foundation. He had ignored my warning about the owner because it didn't fit his narrative. In Logan's world, my brother Christopher was just a line cook, not a culinary prodigy who owned the Gilded Anchor. Logan saw what he wanted to see, a wife from a broken home and a brother with a blue-collar job. He was so blinded by the glare of his own ego that he walked right past the truth. Tonight, that blindness was going to cost him everything he had spent years pretending to be. I didn't call the restaurant to complain or try to reverse the name change. That would have been too merciful. Instead, I walked to the bedroom and pulled my emerald dress out of the closet, the one Logan said was too bold. I zipped it up, checked my reflection, and applied a layer of lipstick that looked like war paint. I wasn't going to a cheap pub. I was going to the Gilded Anchor to watch my husband choke on the status he was so desperate to swallow. To understand why I didn't scream, you have to understand the slow suffocation of the last 3 months. We lived in the manicured guest house behind his parents' estate. On paper, it looked like generosity, a stepping stone while we saved for a forever home. In reality, I wasn't a wife or a tenant. I was a live-in asset manager with a checkbook. The dynamic was subtle at first, a grocery run here or a utility bill there. But then the walls started closing in. It started on a Tuesday evening when Logan walked into our living room, carrying contractor estimates. He threw them onto the coffee table, like he was dealing a winning hand of poker. "Mom wants to redo the master bath in the guest house," he said, loosening his silk tie. "Imported Italian tile, heated floors, a rainfall shower. It's going to look incredible." I looked at the glossy brochures, naive enough to think he was just sharing family news. I scanned the bottom line, and my breath hitched. $12,000. "That's nice for them," I said, turning back to my laptop. "I hope they enjoy it." Logan laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that made my skin prickle. "No, Kinsley, we're paying for it. Or rather, you are. My bonus doesn't hit until next quarter, and the contractor needs the deposit now." I stopped typing, my fingers freezing over the keys. The air in the room suddenly felt very thin. "Excuse me," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. It's an investment, he explained, adopting the condescending tone he reserved for children. We live here rent-free. This increases property value. It's equity. He leaned over the sofa, invading my space. Besides, after everything my parents have done for you, looking past your background, it's the least you can do. There it was. The hook that always caught me. The sharp reminder that I was the lucky charity case they had graciously allowed inside. For years, I had worn what I call the survivor's invisible chain. When you grow up with a single parent scraping by, patching holes in clothes, you develop a deep, seated belief that you are somehow less than. You believe stability is a luxury you have to earn daily. Logan and his parents knew this. They sensed that insecurity like sharks smell blood in the water. They had convinced me that their acceptance was a gift I had to constantly repay to remain worthy. I looked at Logan, then at the estimate, and felt that heavy chain tugging at my throat. I didn't want to be the ungrateful girl from the broken home. I didn't want to be the leech. I wanted to be worthy. So, I opened my checkbook. I wrote a check for $12,000 from my savings, money I had earned working 50-hour weeks. My hand trembled slightly as I tore the paper from the binding, surrendering my hard-earned safety net. Good girl, Logan said, snatching the check before the ink was dry. He didn't say thank you. He didn't offer a hug or a promise of repayment. He just walked out, whistling. They started renovations the next week. His mother came over daily to supervise, criticizing my housekeeping while workmen tore apart the bathroom I had paid for. I realized then that I had purchased a golden cage, paying for marble floors I was barely allowed to stand on. The contrast between the two men in my life wasn't just stark, it was violent. My father, Brian, smelled like motor oil and peppermint, his hands permanently etched with grease from 40 years as a mechanic. He fixed things others broke. Logan, on the other hand, didn't fix things. He sold them. He treated life like a performance art piece, where the audience was anyone who could offer him a promotion. To Logan, my father represented everything he was terrified of becoming invisible. Nothing represented visibility to Logan more than the gilded anchor. It sat on the Boston waterfront, a fortress of glass and mahogany that served as a gatekeeper to the city's elite. You could not just book a table on an app. You had to know someone. There was a 6-month waiting list for the general public, but the real power players walked right in. Logan talked about the gilded anchor the way religious men talk about cathedrals, reverent and obsessed. The week before my dad's birthday, the tension in our house became physical. Logan was vibrating with anxiety because his CEO was flying in from New York on Saturday. He had been trying for weeks to secure a reservation at the anchor, calling in favors and bribing assistants. He refreshed the booking app until his thumbs were sore, but the screen always showed zero availability. To him, eating there wasn't about the food. It was about proving he had finally ascended. For my dad's 65th birthday, I wanted to give him something he would never buy for himself. I wanted him to sit by the window, look out at the harbor, and eat a steak that cost more than a brake pad change. So, I used a connection I had never mentioned to Logan and secured a reservation. I didn't tell him how I did it. I just wanted my father to feel like a king for one night. On Wednesday night, I came home to find Logan pacing the living room, his tie undone. He stopped when I walked in, his eyes narrowing at my calmness. "You have a reservation," he said, staring at the notification on my iPad. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. I set my bag down and nodded. 7 o'clock Saturday. A prime waterfront table at the Gilded Anchor. He stepped closer, invading my space, the smell of stress rolling off him. "How did you get it?" he demanded, ignoring the occasion completely. "I've been trying for a month." I shrugged, keeping my voice light. "I have a contact. It's for my dad's birthday." I told you this. The heir left the room instantly. Logan looked at me, but he wasn't seeing his wife planning a family celebration. He saw an asset. He saw an opportunity. And like everything else in my life, he decided instantly that it was too good to be wasted on my family. From the moment I told him I had a table for 4, I saw the hunger in his eyes. He didn't see a celebration for a mechanic who had raised a daughter alone. He saw leverage for his career. He looked at the confirmation email again, calculating the value of the seat. He didn't ask who my contact was. He just assumed I had gotten lucky, stumbling into a treasure I was too simple to understand or appreciate. Cancel it, Logan said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding register. He stood between me and the hallway, blocking my path to the kitchen. Or rather, transfer the reservation to me. I need that table, Kinsley. The CEO is expecting the best. I stared at him, unable to process the audacity of the request. It's my dad's 65th birthday, I said, clutching the iPad to my chest like a shield. This is special? Logan scoffed, running a hand through his hair. Special? Be serious, Kinsley. Your dad is a mechanic. He sneered, stepping closer until I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. He drinks beer from a can. He doesn't know the difference between a dry, aged ribeye and a supermarket steak. He'll be uncomfortable there. I felt a cold heat rise in my chest, a warning sign I ignored. He'll embarrass me just by existing in that space. Logan continued, his eyes devoid of empathy. If I take my boss to some second-tier steakhouse, I look weak. If I walk him into the Gilded Anchor at prime time, I look like a player. Logan explained, gesturing wildly with his hands. I get the promotion. We get the money. Don't be selfish. I took a step back, my grip tightening on the device. Selfish. You just asked me to cancel my father's milestone for your boss. Logan rolled his eyes. I'm asking you to be a partner. To prioritize our future over some sentimental dinner that he won't even appreciate. He's my father, I said, my voice shaking with a rage I barely recognized. And he deserves one night where he isn't treated like he's invisible. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Logan looked at me with genuine confusion, as if I had spoken in a foreign language. He is invisible? Logan shouted, his face twisting into something ugly. That's his lot in life. Don't drag me down with him. You have a chance to help me rise. The air in the room grew toxic. Logan leaned in, his voice dropping to a hiss. You give me that reservation code, or you can forget about me paying for anything around here next month. He pointed a finger at my chest. You want to play the independent woman? Fine. See how far you get without my family's support. See how long you last in this house when my parents realize you're ungrateful. It was a naked threat, stripped of all pretense. I looked at the man I had married and saw nothing but a desperate, small creature. I'm not giving you the code, I said, my voice steady. I turned my back on him, walking toward the bedroom with a confidence I didn't feel. You can threaten me all you want, Logan. But Saturday is for my dad. I heard him kick the sofa as I walked away, a childish tantrum from a man who wasn't used to hearing the word no. I locked the bedroom door and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. I thought the conversation was over. I thought I had won the argument by drawing a line in the sand. But I had made a critical error. I assumed Logan played by the rules of decency. I didn't realize that a desperate man doesn't accept defeat, he just changes the tactic. While I slept that night, he was already planning how to steal what he couldn't earn. The betrayal didn't happen with a shout, it happened in silence while I washed my hair. On Saturday morning, I left my phone on the vanity while I stepped into the shower. The steam filled the room, masking the sound of footsteps on the tile. Logan knew my passcode. It was our anniversary date, a fact that now felt like a cruel joke. He didn't just look at the screen, he rated it. He forwarded the confirmation email to himself, deleted the evidence, and walked out before I even reached for a towel. I didn't realize what he had done until 4 o'clock that afternoon. The text message chimed, bright and cheerful on the screen. It wasn't an apology. It was a victory lap. Dad belongs at a cheap pub. He wrote, confirming he had called the restaurant and swapped the name on the reservation. He thought he was teaching me a lesson in hierarchy. He believed that by erasing my name from the system, he had erased my power. I typed a reply. My brother owns this place. He didn't know I had the owner on speed dial. I drove to my father's small apartment, with a knot of anticipation tightening in my stomach. When he opened the door, the sight of him nearly broke me. He was wearing his one good suit, a charcoal gray number he had bought for my mother's funeral 10 years ago. It was tight across the shoulders, the fabric worn shiny at the elbows, but his shoes were polished until they reflected the hallway bulb. He looked nervous. He looked proud. He looked like a man trying his best to fit into a world that never wanted him. "You sure about this, kiddo?" he asked, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. "That place looks expensive on the internet. Maybe we should just grab a burger." He wasn't afraid of the food, he was afraid of the judgment. He was used to diners with sticky menace, not white tablecloths and sommeliers. I squeezed his rough, calloused hand, feeling the tremors of anxiety running through him. "No burgers tonight, Dad," I said, my voice fierce. "Tonight, you eat like a king." We arrived at the waterfront as a cool Boston mist began to roll in off the harbor. The gilded anchor loomed ahead, a fortress of glass and steel glowing against the gray sky. A line of luxury sedans idled at the valet stand, their drivers waiting for the elite to descend. My dad hesitated as he looked at the lineup of Bentleys and Porsches. He looked down at his own scuffed shoes, the confidence draining out of him like water from a cracked cup. "Kinsley, I don't think I belong here," he whispered, pulling back slightly. "Look at those people. They look like they own the city." I gripped his arm tighter, refusing to let him retreat into the shadows he was so comfortable in. "They don't own anything, Dad," I said, leading him toward the massive oak doors. "They just rent the appearance of it." I pushed the doors open, and the scent of truffle oil and aged leather hit us instantly. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, buzzing with the hushed tones of old money. The maitre d' looked up from his podium, his face professional and impassive. "Reservation for Kinsley," I said clearly, using the name Logan had tried to erase. He tapped his screen, frowned, then tapped again. "I see the reservation, ma'am," he said, his eyes flicking to a note on the screen. "But it appears your party has already been seated." The game had officially begun. "I see," I said, my voice unnaturally calm against the backdrop of clinking crystal and hushed gossip. The maitre d', a man named Julian who had known my brother since culinary school, gave me a nearly imperceptible nod. He didn't offer to remove the imposters seated at the window. He simply stepped aside, clearing the path for the collision course I had orchestrated. "Table 4 by the water," Julian murmured, closing the reservation book with a snap that sounded like a gavel. My father looked at me, confused by the interaction. "Kin, what's going on?" "Just follow me, Dad," I whispered, guiding him past a display of live lobsters tanked in blue light. We walked into the main dining room, a cavernous space where the hum of conversation was low, refined, and expensive. Every head that turned assessed us, judging the fit of my father's suit and the determination in my stride. I felt the weight of their gazes, but for the first time, I didn't care about fitting in. I was on a mission. Dad tried to smooth his lapels, his hands trembling slightly as he walked. There, in the prime corner booth overlooking the harbor lights, sat the thieves. Logan was laughing at something the CEO said, leaning in with that desperate, eager to please energy that always made me cringe. His parents, Susan and Jeffrey, were there too, sipping wine that I knew cost more than my dad's weekly paycheck. They looked comfortable, entitled, and utterly at home in a space they hadn't paid for. They were feasting on the validation Logan craved, oblivious to the storm approaching them. It was a tableau of stolen glory. Logan saw us first, his glass pausing halfway to his mouth. His smile faltered, twitching like a glitching video, before hardening into a glare of pure panic. He excused himself abruptly, nearly knocking over his water glass, and rushed to intercept us before we could reach the table. He moved like a linebacker, blocking my path with a physical aggression that startled a waiter carrying a tray of oysters. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice low but dripping with venom. "You are ruining everything. Get out." "You stole my reservation, Logan," I said, my voice loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, piercing the ambient jazz. "I repurposed it," he corrected instantly, glancing nervously back at his boss, who was now watching us with mild curiosity. "Look at your father, Kinsley. Just look at him." Logan gestured vaguely at Dad, who was standing a few feet behind me, clutching his worn hands. "He's wearing a polyester suit in a 5-star restaurant. He looks like he's here to fix the plumbing, not eat the food." The insult landed like a physical blow, stripping away the last layer of my father's dignity. Dad shrunk into himself, his eyes dropping to the polished floor as if he wanted to disappear into the woodwork. "Maybe we should go, Kinsley," Dad mumbled, his voice thick with shame. "I don't want to cause trouble." Logan nodded, his eyes wide with manic relief. "Exactly. Take him to a diner where he'll be comfortable. Go now, and I might forgive you for this stunt." He reached out, trying to steer me away. I slapped his hand away, the sound sharp and shocking in the hushed room. "No," I said, stepping into his personal space until I could see the sweat beading on his forehead. "We are not going anywhere." Logan grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep with bruising force. "You are making a scene," he whispered through gritted teeth. "Leave now, or I swear to God, you won't have a home to go back to tonight. I will lock you out before you even get to the driveway." That threat was the final key turning in the lock, severing the last thread of my attachment to him. The fear I usually felt at his ultimatums evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I looked at the man I had shared a bed with and realized I was looking at a parasite in a designer suit. He thought the house was his leverage, but he didn't realize the house was just a cage I was ready to dismantle. I pulled my arm free, smoothing the fabric of my dress. "You're right, Logan," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that forced him to lean in closer. "I am making a scene. But you haven't seen the main act yet." I didn't look at him again. I looked past him, toward the heavy double doors of the kitchen. I raised my hand high, not in a wave, but in a sharp, deliberate signal. It was the gesture of a conductor starting a symphony, or perhaps an executioner dropping the blade. The air in the room seemed to vanish. The double doors swung open with a violent force that silenced the room instantly. The clinking of silverware stopped. The murmured conversations died. A figure emerged from the steam and noise of the kitchen, not walking, but striding with terrifying purpose. He wasn't wearing a server's uniform. He was dressed in pristine chef's whites, his name embroidered in gold thread on the chest. The staff stopped what they were doing and stood at attention, creating a corridor of respect. My brother had arrived to collect the debt. Christopher walked past Logan without a glance, his eyes locked on our father. The authority radiating off him was palpable. A physical weight that silenced the room. He didn't look like the line cook Logan had mocked for years. He looked like a king in his castle. He stopped in front of Dad, who was still shrinking into his fitting suit, and smiled warmly. "Happy birthday, Dad," Christopher said, his voice booming. He pulled our father into a crushing hug, completely indifferent to the grease stains or the cheap cologne. Then, Christopher turned slowly, deliberately pivoting on his heel to face the table by the window. He looked at Logan, whose mouth was opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He looked at the CEO, Mr. Sterling, who was staring in confusion, his fork suspended mid-air. Finally, he looked at Susan and Jeffrey, frozen mid-sip. "I believe," Christopher said, his voice icy and loud enough to reach the back wall, "that you are sitting at my father's table." The silence that followed was absolute. Logan blinked rapidly, his brain clearly misfiring as he tried to rewrite reality on the fly. He stood up, smoothing his jacket with trembling hands, a frantic plastic smile plastered on his face. "Christopher," he exclaimed, his voice cracking slightly. "I didn't know you were working tonight. Mr. Sterling. This is Kinsley's brother. We go way back. I actually planned this whole thing as a surprise." He looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading, begging me to play along with the lie. "Cut the crap, Logan," Christopher said. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't have to. He snapped his fingers. A sharp sound that echoed like a gunshot. Julian appeared instantly at his elbow, placing a silver tray on the table directly in front of the CEO. On it sat a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. "What is this?" Logan asked, his smile faltering as he reached for it. Christopher slapped his hand away. "Not for you. It's for the man who thinks he's hiring a success story." "Mr. Sterling?" Christopher said, his gaze fixed on Logan like a laser. "My brother-in-law here likes to play the part of the wealthy provider. He talks a big game about status. But the truth is, he's been financing his lifestyle, and his parents' lifestyle, on my sister's back for 3 years." Mr. Sterling picked up the paper, adjusting his glasses. "Italian marble tile, $4,000. Christopher recited from memory, his voice cutting through the air. "Heated flooring system, $3,000. Custom vanity, $2,500. Christopher leaned in, placing his palms flat on the white tablecloth. "Contractor labor and installation fees, $2,500. Total stolen from my sister to renovate a house. She doesn't own $12,000. Paid in full by Kinsley." He paused for effect. "Balance remaining in Logan's bank account 0. Susan gasped, clutching her pearls in a caricature of shock. Jeffrey looked down at his wine glass. Logan turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. This wasn't just embarrassment. It was psychological annihilation. "You set me up," Logan screamed, slamming his hand on the table and shattering a wine glass. The dining room gasped collectively. "You planned this! You let me come here. You let me bring my boss just to humiliate me!" He spun on me, his finger pointing in my face, shaking with rage. "You liar. You told me your brother was a cook. You hid this. You hid his money. You tricked me into looking stupid." It was the desperate thrashing of a man drowning in his own inadequacy. "She didn't hide anything, Logan," Christopher said, his voice steady and cold. "You never asked. You were too busy mocking our father's job to realize his son built an empire." "Mr. Sterling set the paper down and looked at Logan with an expression of pure, unfiltered disgust. It wasn't anger, it was the look one gives to something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of a shoe. "Logan," Mr. Sterling said quietly. "Sit down. You're making a scene." Logan froze, the fight draining out of him instantly. Mr. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket with a finality that echoed louder than any shout. He didn't look at Logan again. "I apologize for the disturbance," he said to Christopher, his tone professional. Then he turned his gaze to the man slumped in the chair. "Don't bother coming into the office on Monday. You are suspended indefinitely pending a full internal audit of your expenses. If you treat your family like this, I can only imagine what you're doing with my company's accounts." He walked away, Logan whispered something about a promotion, his voice small and broken, but the bank of Kinsley was closed. I took off my wedding ring. It wasn't a diamond. It was a simple band Logan had bought during his lean years, promising to upgrade it later. He never did. I placed it on the silver tray, right on top of the itemized bill Christopher had printed. "The renovations," I said, pointing to the paper. "Consider that my parting gift. That $12,000 is your severance package." I walked away. I didn't look back at the wreckage I left behind in the dining room. The silence of that space felt heavy, suffocating under the weight of gold leaf and pretension. But the moment the kitchen doors swung shut behind us, the world changed. The air was thick with the smell of roasting garlic and searing meat, a chaotic symphony of pans clattering and orders being shouted. It was loud, messy, and real. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of freedom, leaving the performance art piece behind. Christopher guided us through the stainless steel maze of prep stations to a small wooden table tucked in the back corner. It wasn't the prime waterfront view Logan had killed his career for, but it was the beating heart of the restaurant. "Sit," Christopher commanded gently, pulling out a chair for Dad. He grabbed a bottle of wine from a nearby rack, uncorking it with a fluid motion. "No menus back here," he said, pouring 3 generous glasses. "You eat what I cook." For the first time, my shoulders dropped. The food started arriving instantly. Platters of steak that melted like butter, and roasted vegetables sizzling from the fire. We didn't eat with the delicate, terrified precision of the guests out front. We ate with our hands, tearing into warm bread and passing plates across the table. Dad took a bite of the ribeye, his eyes closing in pure bliss. "Better than a burger," he mumbled, wiping sauce from his chin with a napkin. Christopher laughed, a rich sound that bounced off the tiled walls, erasing the tension. Dad started telling a story about a stubborn transmission he fixed back in '92. His hands animating the tale in the air. For 3 years, Logan had rolled his eyes at these stories, calling them low-class noise. But here, amidst the steam and the shout of the line cooks, Dad was the center of gravity. I watched him, realizing how wrong I had been. I had spent so much money trying to buy him respectability, thinking a fancy suit and an expensive table would validate his existence. There is a specific kind of poverty that has nothing to do with bank accounts. It is the poverty of the soul, the delusion that buying expensive things makes you valuable. Logan wore a $1,000 suit, but inside he was bankrupt, a hollow man echoing with insecurity. My father wore a $50 suit from a discount rack, yet he sat there like an emperor. I had tried to buy a seat at a table where I was never welcome, ignoring the kingdom we had already built. I looked at my bare finger, the pale strip of skin where the ring used to be. I expected to feel loss, but I only felt lighter, as if I had put down a heavy suitcase I had been carrying for miles. "Pass the potatoes, kiddo," Dad said, smiling at me with eyes that saw everything. I passed the bowl, realizing I didn't need a reservation to belong. I had spent years trying to buy a future, only to realize my richness was sitting right next to me.